Métis leaders are in Ottawa today for a meeting with the Prime Minister and some of his cabinet over Bill C-5. However, the summit is more notable for who isn't there. As we reported earlier, the Manitoba Métis Federation isn't going because the Métis National Council and Métis Nation of Ontario will be there. Métis Nation British Columbia also backed out because they were only invited as online observers. For more, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Laewetz is CEO of Paskwâw Strategies, and Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks to you both for being here. Niigaan, we'll start with you. Was this entirely predictable that the Manitoba Métis Federation would pull out of the summit depending on who was at the table?
Well, for anyone who was watching or has watched anything that the MMF has said or that the MNC has said over the past 5 years or so, if you weren't aware this was going to happen, then I would fire whoever is advising you. Clearly, the government had either no idea or no interest in the fact that the MMF just simply won't sit with individuals from the Métis Nation of Ontario or certain members of the Métis National Council. If you aren't aware of that, then you just aren't aware of what has been an issue that has been gripping the Indigenous world, and particularly our world as Indigenous media members for the past half decade or so.
Yeah, you know, Jennifer, as Niigaan kind of alluded to there, this infighting has been going on for a very long time. Should the federal government not have known this could happen?
You would think that they would know that this was happening. You know, the Métis National Council and the Métis Nation of Ontario have been, you know, across headlines for as long as I can remember in regards to identity and the issue that they have actually connecting a lot of the members of the Métis Nation of Ontario to the Red River. And there are those complex dynamics amongst our people. And I'm just not understanding Carney's team on this one. And, you know, even with Métis politics in general, perhaps they should have went to the table independently. And, you know, this entire summit and the way everything was organized, it was bound to be controversial in the fact that they, I think, just tried this one size fits all approach, knowing that everybody was going to have a different stance on this, especially as independent or self-government.
Niigaan, do you think the MMF and MNBC and its citizens lose out by not being at the summit?
Well, if the Carney government decides to move forward, then they certainly will. It certainly indicates that there is not a whole lot of interest from the Carney government of looking at intricacies involving rights holders, and that there are particular individual groups that recognize regional interests. But unfortunately, this is also something that we saw with the Chiefs meeting. There wasn't a lot of interest in thinking about things regionally, geographically, or even in many cases culturally. And there are 640 plus First Nations, just recognized ones. There are hundreds of Métis communities, and then there are hundreds of communities who claim to be Métis, but other Métis say are not Métis. So we're not sure what to refer to them appropriately. And they are, in particular cases, also have some ways in which they are identifying as rights holders, whether they are or not, I guess is for First Nations to decide, for the courts to decide. You know, all of this leads to a big issue of, I think the Carney government overestimated the sense of urgency that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples would have when it comes to Trump. I think we're not going to give up our rights, even if there is an unprecedented situation in the country. Canada still has to act differently than it's acted for the past 150 years.
Jennifer, do you think the way this has played out could impact projects proposed in Manitoba and securing the MMF's consent for those projects?
I think there could definitely be impacts in terms of, you know, advocacy or protesting or things getting even more heated or negative, maybe, I guess, on the Liberal government. I don't think that they really knew what they were doing going into this bill. But at the same time, it also goes back to us as a people too, and our way of how we communicate with government as independent self-governments, because, I'm seeing with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan right now where we're not even sure what route they're going to go on this, but it's because everything is such a disaster on that front that it's like when things are messy like that, I wholeheartedly believe that the federal government is watching and hoping that that kind of takes the wheel and distracts a lot of people. And then they also have that kind of excuse on their end. Well, they're like, well, none of them can seem to get along, the MMF and the MMS and MNBC and MNO. It's like, oh, just another day, more controversy. And that's kind of the problem too, when our, internal governments almost get, unstable, or they present as unstable. And then it's like, well, what is the federal government thinking right now? And are they actually going to use that to their advantage? I would hope not, but I don't put anything above the government.
Okay, Niigaan, the PM and cabinet ministers have now met with First Nations, Inuit, and some Métis leaders. What's your take on how these summits have gone?
Well, we'll go through the three of them. Uneven with the chiefs. Some chiefs certainly are on board for fast-tracking projects of the national interest, wanted to start it tomorrow. And then you've got, I think, the vast majority of chiefs who felt very unsatisfied, very misrepresented. Also that the meeting was at best confusing and haphazard. The Inuit, I think, was probably the most successful meeting of the three. We heard the least complaints from that area, but notice that it was the one meeting that was different. It was where Carney and his cabinet ministers went to a meeting in which Indigenous peoples had indicated where they would like to meet, helped construct an agenda, and in many cases followed the guidance from those Indigenous peoples. And then we have this Métis summit, which I don't even think you can call it a summit. To call it a disaster is probably complimenting it, because it is such a mess. You have groups that are boycotting it. You have groups that are attending and purporting to represent people who many Métis people say they don't represent. Where do we even begin to talk about the disaster of this meeting? And so what I would say is it's kind of Canada as usual. It's the way in which Canada continues to treat, as Jen pointed out during our recorded segment, a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to Indigenous peoples, which never works, which is the whole reason why we have regional organizations that represent regional interests, cultural interests to begin with. And it is just a non-effective way of dealing with it. And it really illustrates why national organizations won't be able to get it done for much longer into the future.
Great points. Jennifer, have these summits been a success at all?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. The First Nations one was a mess, and it goes back to, I think, the Carney government not understanding those differences. I saw there was a post on Facebook from a former chief that had said I think it was the province of Newfoundland that had the two chiefs, and they got the same amount of time as the province with like 70 plus nations, which would be Saskatchewan. And it is true where it's like, I don't think you're understanding the regional differences here, and also the differences from not only province to province in terms of what our needs are, because our needs in Saskatchewan are going to be much different than the needs out east or out west. But just how to engage with us, because again, that one size fits all where they assume, oh, we'll just knock off all the provinces, we'll give every province the same amount of time, goes to show that they're also not even understanding the different groups of populations and how there is much more First Nations here than there is out east. So I don't think it was a raving success by any means. I think if we could look at this as a starting point and something to learn from, that would be a benefit, but it's not a starting point because the bill has already passed. So,
Niigaan, do you feel like any Indigenous leader is going to view these summits as the necessary and needed consultation on Bill C-5?
Not as consultation. I mean, that would be a big mistake. However, I do think there is a significant enough amount of chiefs and perhaps a significant amount of Métis leadership. I think there was one thing that's really key to listen to in David Chartrand's speech, MMF president, yesterday. He kept sort of opening the doorway to going, well, we're ready to meet. We only need an hour of your time, Prime Minister. Come over here. We can make an agreement right away. I think there are segments of Indigenous leadership throughout the country that really want to move fast. They understand the unprecedented nature of Donald Trump. And I think that there is areas to grow there. And if I were to be positive, and I'll take Jen's lead in being a bit more glass half full, it is that I think there are areas that the government can work with elements of First Nations, Inuit, and I think probably the first off, the Métis, that there's opportunities for interest for the Métis sections, and particularly the MMF, to want to work with the federal government. It's just that the federal government continues to kind of step in their own way. They continue to sort of implement their own mistakes. And in many ways, they're not taking good guidance. I keep saying this. I feel like a broken record on this program, on this recording that we do every week. Who is counseling this government? Who is talking to the Prime Minister? And it just says to me that there is just some deep problems within the Prime Minister's office when it comes to dealing with First Nations and Métis people in particular. They seem to be okay with counseling in terms of northern issues. So I would give a lot of credit to Minister Chartrand, for example, Rebecca Chartrand, and maybe Rebecca Alty. But there's just like, who is telling them that these moves are good? They are clearly not, and they are creating more problems, more obstacles in what is becoming an emergent situation with the U.S. government.
Some good questions there, Niigaan. Jennifer, what do you see is happening next when it comes to consultation over this bill or any announced projects?
I have no idea. It just seems that it changes every week on where I imagine this is going to go. You know, I think that the Prime Minister should take that meeting with the Manitoba Métis, and I think he should, you know, spend some of that time getting to know the people in this country that are the rights holders. You know, the summer months, the House does not resume until mid-September. There's a lot of ample opportunity here. This maybe should have been one of the first things he did, but also maybe go back and start reviewing who it is, the people that are counseling you and giving you this advice, because honestly, a lot of this could be avoided if there were also Indigenous people that have a lay of the land included in these rooms. But the issue is that they have these like brick wall around these high-level staffers that try to make contact with our organizations, with our people, and I think they just come back to the table like, I think this is the right way to go. But maybe if you started putting more of us at the table, you could avoid a lot of this.
Yeah. Well, you know, sorry, Niigaan, did you have more to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I cannot agree more. This is so avoidable with competency.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you two are going to have to end it there, but thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.